You're not my real dad. Don't pretend you are. That was the blade Kelly thrust into me when she was 14. It was said without hesitation, in the middle of the kitchen, while the late afternoon light poured through the blinds and striped the walls. I had come home from work carrying groceries, the kind of small ritual no one ever thanked me for, and she threw those words like a stone through glass. The bag slipped from my hand. Apples rolled across the tile. I didn't even bend to pick them up. I just stood there watching her face, listening to the echo of those 7 words. You're not my real dad. Don't pretend you are. It wasn't the first time I'd felt it, only the first time she gave it a voice. By then I was 56, a man who had carried one family on his back only to be abandoned, and who thought foolishly that marrying Susan would give me a second chance. I didn't just marry her, I married the responsibility of her daughter. I told myself it was a blessing, that Kelly, only 8 years old when I stepped in her life, would learn that not all men leave, that she would see me as proof that love and constancy can exist. So I poured myself into her. Vacations vanished. Dreams were quietly erased. I stopped talking about buying the motorcycle I had once wanted. I stopped mentioning the trips to Italy I had imagined taking when I was younger. I worked overtime, shifted funds, and every paycheck became another piece of her life. Braces when her teeth came in crooked, a new bed when she outgrew the old one, lessons for piano, then lessons for dance, then lessons for whatever her friends were doing that month. Each demand was small on its own, but over years it became a tidal wave, and I let it pull me under. I told myself this was fatherhood, that sacrifice was proof of love. I believed one day she would look at me not as the man who married her mother, but as the man who stayed, the man who built her life plank by plank, while his own body bent and his own world was neglected. But Kelly never let me forget where I stood. At first it was small. She would call me Michael instead of Dad, even though Susan gently encouraged otherwise. She kept her distance at school events, never introducing me to her teachers, never acknowledging me when I cheered from the stands. She'd go straight to her mother with questions, with secrets, with troubles, leaving me as an afterthought. Then came the teenage years. Distance became dismissal. The house I paid for became her stage, and I was treated like stage crew unseen, unthanked, but always expected to keep the lights on. She invited friends over, and I would hear my name tossed around in whispers and laughter. She'd mock my clothes, my manner, the way I worked long hours and came home tired, not to my face, but loud enough, always loud enough. And then, only when she needed something, money, a ride, a favor, she would appear at my side, her voice soft but hollow. Michael, can you? Always beginning with that word. Michael. Never Dad. Never even stepdad. Just Michael. The man who signed checks and drove late-night errands. Susan noticed. She would touch my arm sometimes after dinner when Kelly had gone upstairs and say softly, Michael, this isn't right. She treats you like staff, not family. But I always brushed it off. I told myself it was just her age, that teenagers were cruel by nature. That time would smooth out the sharpness. She'll grow out of it, I told Susan. One day she'll see. But inside, in the quiet hours when the house was still and only the hum of the refrigerator filled the air, I knew better. I remembered each silence at the dinner table, each refusal to look me in the eye, each muttered joke I wasn't supposed to hear. They were not accidents. They were warnings. And the worst part, I ignored them. Why? Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I admitted the truth, that she would never accept me, that all my sacrifices were building nothing but resentment. I would have to face the years I had already lost, the years spent pouring money and time into a bond that didn't exist, the years of bending myself into a role she never wanted me to play. So I kept going. I kept giving. I drove her to practices she barely acknowledged me for. I fixed her computer at midnight before a project was due. I made deposits into her account without even telling Susan, just so Kelly wouldn't feel left out when her friends were going shopping. Every act was quiet, invisible, erased by the next demand. And every time Susan tried to pull me back, I silenced her with optimism. She's just a teenager. She'll come around. But the truth? I didn't believe my own words. Every cold glance, every sharp dismissal was a sign, and I ignored them not because I didn't see them, but because I couldn't bear the weight of admitting what they meant, that I was a stranger in my own home, a man tolerated for his money and his labor, but never loved. The day she said those words, "You're not my real dad, don't pretend you are," wasn't the beginning. It was the confirmation of everything I already knew. I looked at her that afternoon, her arms crossed, her eyes hard, and I realized something devastating. She had been telling me the same thing for years. Only now she had stripped away the silence and given it sound. And I stood there, surrounded by the apples rolling across the floor, too stunned to answer, too broken to fight back. The house smelled of roasted chicken, garlic, and rosemary. Susan had spent the afternoon cooking, hoping for one of those rare evenings when everyone sat at the table together without raised voices or slammed doors. The plates gleamed under the light, glasses lined up neatly, and for a moment it almost looked like the kind of family I had always imagined myself belonging to. But then Kelly laughed. The sound was sharp, high-pitched, cruel in a way only a teenager's laughter can be. She was leaning back in her chair, phone clutched in her hand, showing something to her cousin, who sat across from her. The conversation was light, meaningless, until I suggested something about our upcoming plans. I don't even remember what it was. Maybe I mentioned setting a curfew or asked about her grades. Something ordinary, something any father might say. And that was when she cut me down. "You're not one of us," she said, her voice carrying across the table. "You have no right to decide anything." Her cousin froze, fork hovering above his plate. Susan's hand stopped midway to her glass. Even the dog lying under the table seemed to sense the shift in the air. The laughter died instantly, leaving only silence. And me, staring at her, my face burning though I hadn't moved. The words were cruel, yes, but what gutted me wasn't the sound. It was the casualness. She didn't shout. She didn't spit it in anger. She said it with a smirk, like it was a joke everyone was in on except me. As if she had been waiting for the right moment to humiliate me publicly, to announce what she had always whispered in private, that I was an outsider. "You're not one of us. You have no right to decide anything." Susan tried to recover, her voice trembling. "Kelly, don't." But I raised a hand. I didn't want her to finish, because in that silence, in that single exchange, something shifted inside me. I didn't shout back. I didn't slam the table or storm out. I sat still, my hands folded, my eyes fixed on my plate, as though I could make the food disappear with concentration alone. But behind my silence, a decision began to take shape. I had tolerated years of distance, years of coldness, years of being treated like a stranger in my own home. I had told myself that patience was love, that time would heal. But there, in that moment, I knew the truth. Nothing was going to change. Respect wasn't hiding under the surface, waiting to bloom. It wasn't coming at all. Dinner ended in awkward murmurs. The cousin excused himself quickly, his chair scraping against the floor as he fled from the tension. Kelly scrolled through her phone unbothered, her laughter returning in small bursts as though nothing had happened. Susan cleared the plates in silence, her eyes darting toward me, searching for words, for reassurance, but finding none. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing over and over in my mind. "You're not one of us. You have no right to decide anything." The more I repeated them, the clearer my vision became. She was right. I had no rights here, not as far as she was concerned, and yet I had been paying for everything as though I did. I had been carrying her life like a mule under someone else's load. But that night, as the clock ticked past midnight and the house lay quiet, I decided no more. I got out of bed, careful not to wake Susan, and sat at the desk in my office. I opened the drawer where I kept the receipts, the printouts, the reminders of every expense that had passed through my hands. Dance classes, new clothes, concert tickets, and at the very top of the pile, the confirmation for her upcoming trip with friends, the one she had begged for, the one I had already paid for in full, a weekend at the coast, hotel, food, travel, everything arranged, everything bought, thousands of dollars. My dollars. I stared at the papers, My jaw clenched, and I realized that paying for it now felt obscene. Paying for her laughter, her dismissal, her contempt. It was as if I were funding my own humiliation, so I canceled it. The next morning before leaving for work, I called the travel company. My voice was calm, my words steady. Yes, I'd like to cancel a reservation. They asked for my name, my account, my reason. I gave them everything without hesitation. I listened to the sound of keys tapping, to the confirmation number being read back to me. When they told me the refund would take a few weeks, I didn't care. All that mattered was that the trip no longer existed. I hung up, slipped the receipt back into the drawer, and left for work without a word. All day I carried a strange kind of stillness in me. Not joy, not relief, something colder. Like the calm that comes after a storm destroys everything. I wasn't rebuilding. I wasn't fixing. I was simply done. That evening, the storm arrived. Kelly came down to dinner as usual, her phone in her hand, her expression unreadable. We sat at the table, Susan serving quietly, the tension from the night before still hanging heavy. For a few minutes, it almost seemed like we would make it through in silence. And then Kelly's phone buzzed. She read the message, her face shifting from confusion to shock, then to anger. Tears welled up before she even looked at me. "My trip," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They said it's canceled. They said the payment was reversed. Did you—" She stopped, staring at me as though she already knew the answer. I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. I looked at her, calm, steady, unblinking. "Yes," I said. The tears spilled then, fast and hot. She slammed the phone down on the table, her voice breaking. "You can't do that. You promised. I've been planning this for months. Everyone's going." I cut her off with a single word. "No." She blinked, stunned. "No? That's it? Just no?" "That's it," I said. My voice was low, but it carried more weight than any shouting could. "You made it clear last night that I am not part of this family, that I have no right to decide anything. Very well. Then I also have no obligation to pay for your pleasures. Your trip is gone, and from this day forward, things will be different." The room went silent. Susan's fork clattered against her plate. Kelly stared at me, her face wet, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for a word sharp enough to cut me again. But none came. I had taken back something she had never expected me to touch. My authority, my dignity. And in that moment, watching her cry into her untouched dinner, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. Love and care mean nothing without respect. And I would no longer play the role of servant in my own home. The house was heavy that night, the kind of heavy you can feel in your bones, where even the air seems reluctant to move. After the truth spilled at the table, no one said much more. Susan picked at her food in silence, her eyes darting toward me, then away. Kelly kept her face buried in her phone, though her shaking hands betrayed her. When dinner ended, she didn't storm off upstairs the way she usually did. Instead, she stayed in her chair, eyes red, lips trembling, trying to hold her composure. For a girl so used to dismissing me, so practiced at laughing in my face, the tears looked foreign, like she didn't know how to wear them. Finally, her voice broke. "Why would you do that to me?" she asked, staring at her lap. "Why would you ruin everything?" I didn't hesitate. "Because I won't be your wallet anymore." Her head snapped up. For the first time in years, she looked at me directly, as if my words had cut through the distance she always maintained. Her mouth opened, then closed, her tears spilling fresh. "But you always pay. You said—" "I said yes too many times," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "I carried you, Kelly. I gave you everything, while you gave me nothing but contempt. That ends now." The silence that followed was suffocating. Susan shifted in her chair, her hands wringing the edge of the napkin. "Michael," she began softly, her tone pleading. "She's young. She doesn't understand the weight of what she says." I turned to her, my voice cold but steady. "Then she's about to learn. Words have weight. Actions have consequences. She made it clear that I have no place here. Fine. Then she can live with what that means." Kelly shook her head violently. "You're being cruel. It was just a joke. Just—" No, I cut her off. It wasn't a joke. It was the truth you've been throwing at me for years. You just finally had the courage to say it out loud. Her sobs grew louder then, raw and jagged. She pushed her plate away, buried her face in her hands, and wept like a child. It wasn't the manipulative kind of crying teenagers sometimes use. It was the messy, desperate sobbing of someone realizing for the first time that the ground beneath her was no longer solid. I didn't comfort her. I didn't move. I simply sat there, watching, letting the weight of her own words fall on her. When she finally looked up, her cheeks streaked with tears, she whispered, "So what? What are the rules now?" And that was when I spoke the words I should have spoken years ago. "The rules are simple," I said. "From now on, you will receive support only when there is respect. Gratitude first, then help. Not the other way around. If you treat me like a stranger, then you will receive nothing from me. No trips, no extras, no conveniences. I will not fund my own humiliation anymore." Her lips trembled. But that's not fair." "Fair?" I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Fair would have been you acknowledging me years ago. Fair would have been you offering respect without needing to be bought. Life isn't fair, Kelly. It's built on choices, and you made yours." Susan's hand found my arm then, her voice shaking. "Michael, please, don't make it sound so final. She's just a child." "She's 16, I said flatly. "Old enough to know what respect is. Old enough to understand that every action costs something." Susan fell silent, her hand slipping away from mine. Kelly didn't argue anymore. She simply cried, quietly this time, shoulders shaking as she stared down at her empty plate. For the first time, I saw something new in her expression. Not just anger, not just dismissal, but fear. The fear of a girl who realized the rules of her world had changed overnight. That night, she didn't slam her door. She closed it gently, as if afraid even the sound would push me further away. The days that followed were a study in tension. Kelly tested the edges of the new rules almost immediately. She asked me for money for a school project. Normally, I would have handed it over without hesitation. Instead, I looked her in the eye and asked, "What do you say first?" Her face burned red. She muttered something under her breath. I stayed silent. Finally, she whispered, "Please, and thank you." The words sounded strange on her tongue, but I gave her the money, not because I needed her gratitude, but because I needed her to understand the price of disrespect. Another time, she left her dishes on the table and started walking away. I called her name. She froze, glanced back at me nervously, then returned to pick them up. She didn't say anything, but her silence was different this time, not mocking, not dismissive, but wary. Susan noticed the changes too. At night, she whispered to me, "Maybe you're being too harsh." But there was no real conviction in her voice, because she could see what I saw, that for the first time, Kelly was beginning to look at me differently. Not with love, not yet, but with recognition, with the grudging awareness that I wasn't just a faceless provider. One evening, a week after the canceled trip, Kelly sat at the table after dinner, fidgeting with her fork. She didn't look at me, but her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I'm sorry," she said. I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to see if it was genuine, or if she was just fishing for another trip, another privilege. "For what?" I asked finally, her shoulders hunched. "For what I said, at dinner, about you not being one of us." Her eyes flicked toward me, then back down. It was wrong. I studied her face. The apology was halting, incomplete, but it was a start. "You're right," I said quietly. "It was wrong. And it hurt. But what matters now is whether you change. Words won't mean anything if your actions stay the same." She nodded, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Susan reached across the table and touched her hand, relief softening her face. But I didn't let the moment dissolve into sentimentality. "Remember this, Kelly," I said, my voice low but firm. "Love and care mean nothing without respect. I've given you years of both. From now on, you give respect first, or you get nothing." Her eyes met mine then, watery but steady. For the first time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, she had heard me. That night, as I sat alone in my office, I realized something. For years, I had been living like a servant in my own house, convincing myself that love would eventually grow from sacrifice. But love without respect is hollow. Now, for the first time, I had chosen myself, my dignity. And whether Kelly learned from it or not, I knew one truth that could never be undone. I would never go back to being a wallet, a chauffeur, a convenience. I was done. The house no longer felt the same. It wasn't louder or quieter, it was sharper. Every sound, every word carried weight now. The slam of a door was no longer casual, it was defiance. A muttered insult wasn't brushed aside, it was challenged. Even silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of dismissal anymore, but the silence of calculation. Kelly learned quickly that the world had changed. The first test came when she asked for a ride. She stood in the doorway of my office, phone in hand, shifting from one foot to the other. Her tone was softer than usual, but still uncertain. "Can you drive me to practice?" I didn't look up from my desk. "What do you say first?" Her face burned. She swallowed hard. "Please, sir, and thank you." Hakru. It was clumsy, unpolished, but I stood, grabbed my keys, and drove her. Not because I needed the words, but because she needed to feel the weight of them. She sat quietly in the passenger seat, her phone forgotten in her lap, staring out the window as though trying to understand the new landscape she lived in. The second test came when she tried to brush past a chore. Plates left on the table, crumbs scattered, napkin crumpled. Normally, she would vanish upstairs and leave the mess behind. That night, I called her name. She stopped on the stairs, turned slowly, eyes wary. "You forgot something." She hesitated, then came back down. She gathered the plates, wiped the table, stacked everything neatly in the sink. She didn't speak, didn't complain, didn't roll her eyes. For the first time, she completed the task without waiting for her mother to intervene. Susan noticed. One evening, after Kelly had gone to her room, she touched my hand and whispered, "She's changing." I shook my head. "She's learning." "Isn't that the same thing?" she asked. "No," I said. "Change is lasting. Learning can be temporary. Time will tell which this is." Susan fell silent, but I could see the flicker of hope in her eyes. She wanted to believe this was progress, that Kelly was softening, that we were finally becoming what we had pretended to be for so long, a family. But I wasn't ready to believe. Not yet. Weeks passed. Small shifts began to take root. Kelly spoke less cruelly, though the occasional bite still slipped into her tone. She no longer demanded money outright. Instead, she asked haltingly, sometimes awkwardly, but she asked. And when I granted her request, I waited. If she didn't offer gratitude, I said nothing. I simply withheld the next favor. It didn't take long for her to see the pattern. Gratitude opened doors. Disrespect closed them. One night I overheard her talking to a friend on the phone. She thought her door was closed tightly enough, but sound carries in a house built on tension. "He's different now," she whispered. "It's like, I don't know. Like he doesn't need me anymore. Like he doesn't care if I hate him. And it makes me, I don't know, want to try. Because if he doesn't care, then what am I even fighting against?" I stood outside her door, listening, my chest heavy. I didn't feel victory in those words. I felt something colder. Confirmation that love had never been her foundation. It was power, control. And once that power was gone, she was forced to face the truth. That respect was the only currency I would accept. One evening near the end of summer, we sat down for dinner again. The same table where she had humiliated me weeks earlier. The same table where silence had crushed us all. But this time, the air felt different. Kelly sat straighter, her phone tucked away in her pocket. She served herself politely, waited for others before she began. Halfway through the meal, she even looked at me. Looked, not glanced, and said softly, "Thank you for dinner." Susan nearly dropped her fork. I nodded once, keeping my face steady. But inside something shifted. Not forgiveness, not joy, but recognition. She was trying. Whether it was genuine or just survival didn't matter yet. What mattered was that the rules were holding. After dinner, Susan lingered with me in the kitchen while Kelly went upstairs. Her voice was low, careful, almost fragile. You see it, don't you? She's trying. She's really trying. Yep, I admitted. I see it. Then maybe this worked, she whispered. Maybe you saved her. I didn't answer, because deep inside I knew the truth. I hadn't saved her. I had saved myself. Months passed. The house grew quieter, steadier. Kelly stopped mocking me. She stopped treating me like furniture. She didn't call me dad. Not yet, maybe not ever. But she no longer called me just Michael either. Sometimes she said stepdad, the word rolling off her tongue awkwardly, but I let it be. Titles didn't matter anymore. What mattered was respect. The distance between us wasn't healed. There were scars, deep ones, and they would always remain. But there was no longer contempt in her eyes. And in that absence, something else began to grow. Not love, not warmth, but acknowledgement. I could live with that. Looking back now, I see the arc of it all. The years of sacrifice, the years of silence, the humiliation at that dinner table. All of it leading to the moment when I finally chose myself. For the first time in decades, I stopped begging for acceptance and demanded respect. It wasn't easy. It wasn't kind. But it was necessary, because love without respect is slavery, and I will never live as a slave again. So now I ask you, whoever hears this confession, was I wrong? Was I cruel to cut off her trip, to set rules that turned my own house into a battlefield? Or was it the only way, the last way, to teach her that words and actions carry a cost and that respect must be earned? Tell me, if you were in my place, would you have done the same?